Hello, you guys, and welcome back to the Validity Podcast. I'm your host, Valentina Rodriguez, and this is episode 7, I believe. And today we're going to talk all about meal timing, whether increasing the number of meals has any effect on your body composition via the thermic effect of food, and then specifically as to like not just number of meals, but actually the patterns and the regularity of those meals and how that affects body composition. Not to be confused with protein timing, which will be a completely different episode in of itself, but this is just in general, the distribution of your caloric intake. How do you distribute that into how many different specific bouts? And then also, how do you actually organize those different meals? So we're going to look at, I think, like 5 or 6 studies to basically determine what our meal frequency and meal schedules should look like to optimize body composition. But before we get into the science, you already know some personal updates. So starting with the research from Dr. Campbell's lab in the Performance and Physique Enhancement Lab. As you guys know, the world's first reverse dieting study has been IRB approved. So we are getting ready to launch all the recruitment stuff very, very, very soon. If you are interested in participating in the study, it will entail a maintenance, a pretty aggressive dieting phase, and then a post-dieting phase where you'll be assigned to one of 3 different post-dieting strategies to just study the effects of these different strategies at mitigating weight regain after a diet. One of those being obviously reverse dieting. So it is the first study ever done on reverse dieting. If you are interested in being a subject, then please reach out to reversedietstudy@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at VallFitt or at thevaliditypodcast. So either way, I'm going to see it and I will get back to you with all the information that you might need or that I might need in order to get you to be a part of the study if you're eligible. So last episode I recorded and then I yeeted myself to the research meeting, and I'm literally about to do the same. We got a lot done last meeting in terms of creating a lot of recruitment material. This meeting, we're going to go through some of the logistical check-in stuff. So just making sure that everything is seamless with how all of our individual research members, which will be your free coaches if you are a part of the study, making sure that all the check-in sheets, the Excel sheets, how everything is going to run communication-wise is good to go. Everyone's on the same page. Everyone understands how to input the data and all of that, and then also continue finalizing recruitment material. So a lot of stuff going on in lab today, but I am happy to continue hitting the ground running with all those things so that we can officially open up the study. In terms of personal updates, obviously I told you guys last week that I am on prep, so obviously still on prep. I want to say it's been 8 or 9 weeks now. I just edited the YouTube video that I filmed on the first day of prep, which was January 24th, I believe. So I'll be dropping that soon, but this week was honestly a really hard week in prep, and I'm not going to get into it because I'll save most of the prep updates for my YouTube. But just basically, this was one of those weeks where I went into this prep not attached to a specific show, not attached to a specific outcome. I've really been giving it my all day after day, but I've been taking it day by day. I went into this prep knowing that if at any point the goal starts to feel further than it should be, I am so okay with switching gears and correcting course and adjusting the game plan, because I'm not attached to seeing this prep through for the sake of seeing a prep through. I said this in the YouTube video, but I've done 15 shows. I don't need to prove to myself that I can finish a prep. I know I can finish a prep, and I'm not going to continue to put my body through something if it becomes very clear that doing so is still not going to get me the outcome that I want. So this week was really hard because it was one of those weeks where my body is responding, but not at the rate that it needs to be for the shows that we originally had in mind. So this next week or two is really make or break decision time in terms of we pushed a little bit harder, still nowhere near what I've pushed in the past, but pushing harder nonetheless. And just letting my body either kind of catch up or not. And if it doesn't catch up in the next week or two, we will have to kind of set our sights on later shows than anticipated, which is not the end of the world because, my coach is still assuring me that it's not that the goal isn't there at all. It's just that if we push to get too aggressive and we compromise the tissue that is currently making me competitive, then I won't be competitive. So it's a balancing act of getting the body fat off quickly and aggressively, but not at the expense of the tissue. And that might mean that I just need more time. I did wake up lighter after my refeed last week, and I actually have another refeed today. So happy refeed day to me. So yeah, that's what I got for you for prep updates. We're still chugging along. We're still putting in the work. We're still focused. We're still dialed. Just one of those weeks where it's I really wanted to do this one specific show. And there's a chance that that won't be the most strategic show for me to do. And that is okay. And we will just adapt and conquer nonetheless. So with that being said, we are going to get into the science because I know that's what you guys are here for. So basically, when looking at how different meal frequencies affect your body, we can look at it from two different point of views. We can look at, does increasing your meal frequency have any effect on your metabolism? Does it have a metabolic advantage? Or we can look at, does it have any effect on your body composition? You would think they're related, but sometimes in science, we'll see effects on metabolic rates that don't always translate into body composition outcomes that are actually different. So we have some studies looking at different meal frequencies on metabolism, different meal frequencies on body comp. So when we're thinking about metabolism, your overall energy expenditure is made up of your resting metabolic rate, which is just, we've talked about this before, it's just the energy you expend to like survive, to be like a bare minimum human being, like at rest. We also have something called the thermic effect of food, or dietary induced thermogenesis. And this is basically an increase in your metabolism or an increase in your energy expenditure that you get after eating. So the actual energy you burn in the digestive and absorptive process. And then there's obviously physical activity, your exercise energy expenditure, and then there's your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is just like steps, fidgeting, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Like, it still comes from activity, but not from dedicated like exercise activity. That's your NEAT. And so your total daily energy expenditure is a combination of your RMR, of the thermic effect of food, of your exercise energy expenditure, and of your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or your NEAT. So all those things come together and form your total daily energy expenditure. So specifically when we're thinking about meal frequency and the number of meals that you consume a day, most of the research is concerned with, does this increase your thermic effect of food? So if you're eating more frequently, do you have a greater increase in your thermic effect of food that contributes to your total daily energy expenditure? And so the first study that we're going to looked at 3 meals in a day versus 14. This was published by Munsters et al. In 2012, and it had 12 lean, healthy males around 23 years old, 14% body fat. This was a crossover design, meaning all 12 subjects did both the 3-meal condition and the 14-meal condition with an adequate washout between conditions. So they were in a respiratory chamber, and this is kind of like the highest gold standard for measuring any kind of metabolic rate, because you're in a room, all your gases are captured, all your activity is documented, all your intakes are documented. So it really is a really highly controlled study. The subjects went into this respiratory chamber for 36 hours in one of the conditions, either 3 meals or 14 meals. And then they had 1 week washout, and then they came back and they did the other condition. They entered this respiratory chamber at 8 p.m. on the night before the study, and then their first meal began at 8 a.m. the next day. And they continued to eat until 7 or 9 p.m. that day, and then they left the following day at 8 a.m. Does that make sense? So they came in at 8 p.m., woke up at 8 a.m. in the chamber, had a full day of eating, left at 8 a.m. the next day. So they all ingested the same amount of average calories. It was around 2,850 calories. And the difference was whether those 2,850 calories were divided into 3 or into 14 meals. So when the participants came in for the 3-meal condition, they were given a meal at 8 a.m., a meal at 12 p.m., and a meal at 7 p.m. For the 14-meal condition, there was a meal every hour from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And there was very little physical activity, but there was a little bit sprinkled in there, I believe. And they measured 24 hours of energy expenditure. They measured resting metabolic rate, thermic effect of food, and sleeping metabolic rate. And what they found was that there was no significant difference in the 24-hour total daily energy expenditure. So between the 3-meal and the 14-meal group, no difference in the amount of calories that they burned total in the entire 24-hour period that was measured while they were in this respiratory chamber. But the RMR was increased by 6% in the 3-meal condition, but it did not affect the total daily energy expenditure. So some other part of their metabolism compensated for that 6% increase in RMR, but otherwise it didn't have any net effect on their total daily energy expenditure. So this first study, 3 versus 14 meals, is saying at least when it comes to a metabolic advantage, it does not seem that 14 meals is advantageous compared to 3. In the next study that we're going to look at by Okawara et al., published in 2013, it's looking at total daily energy expenditure and fat oxidation in 3 meals versus 6 meals. So a little bit more realistic for the high frequency group. They had 15 healthy male and female participants around 28 years old and average body fat. And this was also a crossover design, meaning, again, all participants did the 3 meal condition and the 6 meal condition with adequate washout between the two. It was a 4-day study, so they had 3 days of a controlled diet prior to entering a room calorimeter. So again, in this room, this calorimetry room that can capture all your gases and measure everything pretty precisely. So on both visits, they ingested the same number of calories, which was 1.5 times their resting metabolic rate. So again, they were all standardized. The 2 conditions had the same amount of calories in them total, but the 3 meal group had a meal at 9 a.m., at 2 p.m., and at 7 p.m., so every 5 hours. And the 6 meal group started at 9 a.m., but they had a meal every 2.5 hours. So 3 meal group, you start your first meal at 9 a.m., and then you get another meal 5 hours later, and then another meal 5 hours later. The 6 meal group started at 9 a.m., and then 2.5 hours later, meal, 2.5 hours later, meal, on and on and on. They were given physical activity, which was stepping. They had like a little stepper thing. And they did 2 sessions of 20 minutes of stepping. And so they measured total daily energy expenditure and fat oxidation. And what they found was, surprise, surprise, no difference in the total daily energy expenditure and no difference in fat oxidation. So with these 2 studies looking specifically at metabolic advantages of increasing meal frequency, we can see that there doesn't seem to be one. This is with controlling the same total caloric daily intake, controlling physical activity, and being in very precise respiratory chambers of room calorimeters, there seems to be no effect on your metabolic rate, on your total daily energy expenditure when you're consuming 3 meals versus 6 meals versus 14 meals. So now let's get into the body composition data, because like I said, metabolic data does not always translate into body comp data. So first body composition data that we're going to look at is by Stote et al., published in 2007, and it is a controlled trial of reduced meal frequency without calorie restriction in healthy normal weight middle-aged adults. And in this study, they looked at 3 meals versus 1 meal. So the other one, 3 meals was the lower threshold. In this one, 3 meals is the upper threshold for meal frequency. So they had 21 healthy males and females around 40 to 50 years old, so a little bit of an older demographic than the previous 2 studies. Their BMI was between 18 to 25 and 24% body fat. This was a crossover design, so all 21 subjects did both the 3 meal condition and the 1 meal condition. They had 2 8-week treatment periods with a 1-week washout. So obviously no respiratory chamber here, no room calorimeter, because they're not looking at metabolic rate. They're looking at body composition. They had an average intake of 2,400 calories, and they were given that in either 3 meals or in 1 meal. The 3 meal group had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the 1 meal group was told to consume their 2,400 calories in a 4-hour period in the early evening. And when they looked at the average intakes actually consumed, the 3 meal condition ended up averaging 2,429 calories a day, while the 1 meal condition ended up averaging 2,364 calories a day. So this is under a 100 calorie difference a day. But if you average that over 8 weeks, because each treatment condition was 8 weeks long, that actually amounts to a 3,640 calorie difference between the average intakes of the 2 conditions. So something to keep in mind. But what did they do? So in the study, the intakes that they were given, obviously the average was around 2,400 calories. It was meant to keep them at maintenance. This was not meant to be in a deficit. This was not meant to be in a surplus. This was simply meant to look at, we don't want to intentionally manipulate your body composition. We just want to see if your maintenance intake in 3 meals versus 1 is going to make a difference on your body composition. They did standardize protein to 1.3 grams per kilogram of body weight, which we know from the rapid fat loss episode is a little bit lower than it should be. We know bare minimum, we want them at 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, if not higher, but alas. And they measured body composition. So what did they find? There was no difference after 8 weeks of each condition. There was no difference in changes in fat-free mass. So in your lean body mass, no changes. However, the 1 meal per day group lost 4.2 pounds of body fat. 4.2 pounds of body fat mass in 8 weeks. And the 3 meal group didn't lose any body fat. Interesting. So this is actually saying, previously we were like, maybe more meals is better for body composition, is better for metabolism. Well, we know more meals is not better for metabolism, but now this is saying less meals. 1 feeding of your maintenance intake over a 4-hour period later in the evening can cause you to lose body fat. That's interesting. Do I think that's the case? I don't know. Because what do I think could be a more likely contributor is the fact that on average, the 1 meal condition was consuming less calories a day than the 3 meal condition. The 1 meal condition had a 3,640 calorie difference over the 8-week period compared to the 3 meal condition. So do I think that it's inherently that consuming 1 large meal has advantageous fat burning properties that are going to result in an improvement in your body composition? I don't think so. I just think maybe it's more conducive towards you eating less. I think it's a lot easier to eat less calories if you only have a 4-hour period. And maybe this is an argument for time restricted feeding, which I'm not going to get into, but potentially. We obviously need to look at more data. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So this next study was conducted by Chapelot et al. In 2006. And what they did, they had 24 healthy males. They were untrained between 19 and 25 years old, around 14% body fat. And they took 12 subjects that normally consumed 3 meals a day, and they made them consume 4. And they took another 12 subjects that normally consumed 4 meals a day, and they had them consume 3. So they were looking at, does adding a meal to what you usually consume, so increasing your meal frequency, does that affect you? And does decreasing your meal frequency affect you? So the ones that normally consume 3 were now consuming 4, and the ones that normally consume 4 were now consuming 3. No difference in caloric intakes. It's just how you distribute that caloric intake. Is it between 3 meals or is it between 4? Is it distributed into more meals than you're used to or less than you're used to? And it was a 4-week study. They were consuming around 2,400 calories per day on average. So what did they find? Between the groups, there were no differences in body weight, body fat percentage, or fat mass. But within the groups, in the group that went from eating 4 meals to eating 3, so in the group that reduced their meal frequency, they had a statistically significant increase of 0.5% of body fat. Not huge. The effect size is 0.3. So small effect, but it was documented and it was statistically significant. And there was no significant change in body fat within the group that went from 3 meals to 4 meals. So the group that increased their meal frequency. So what does this tell us? I don't personally think that this points to meal frequency having a huge effect on body composition at all. I would say if anything, maybe don't reduce it, but it also directly contradicts the study that saw 1 meal being advantageous in losing body fat compared to 3 meals. So this is science for you. The last study that we're going to look at, looking at meal frequency and body composition, was published by Cameron et al. In 2010. And it is looking specifically at 16 sedentary obese males and females around 25 years old. And they were in a 700 calorie deficit. So this was specifically with a caloric restriction, which the other ones did not employ caloric restrictions. The other one were basically employing caloric maintenance and seeing if just the distribution of those calories throughout different number of meals had an effect on body composition. This one's specifically looking at how does meal frequency affect weight loss in a deficit. So again, they were all undergoing a 700 calorie deficit, and they were randomized to either 3 meals and 3 snacks or 3 meals only. So same caloric intake, all on a deficit. It's just whether that caloric intake that you're given, that deficit that you're prescribed, is divided into 3 meals and 3 snacks or just 3 meals. And obviously all of them are in a deficit. So when it comes to the results, both groups lost weight. Both groups lost on average 11 pounds or 4.7% of their body weight, which is a lot. But there was no difference between groups in weight loss or in body fat loss. So dividing your intake, if you're in a diet, between 3 meals and 3 snacks, or between 3 meals doesn't seem to have an effect on how much body fat or how much weight you lose, which is honestly really nice data to like take with you, because I know there's people who like in a diet, they're like, I need to eat frequently. They don't have to be big meals, but like I will be hungry in 2 hours and I need a little snack to look forward to. And then there's people who will be like, if my meals aren't substantial, if they're not big enough, I will be miserable. So I'd rather have fewer meals and just make them bigger. And so with this specific study, since it's the only one we looked at that's actually employing a caloric restriction, a caloric deficit, I would say that this is one of the better things that you should take away from the episode, in knowing that if your preference is personally, like you like to eat more frequently, even if they're smaller, pop off, have 3 meals, have your snacks, as long as you're still in a deficit. Or if you're on the other side of the coin, which is like, no, like I need to have like a hefty meal, or as hefty as I can on a diet, and I don't care to incorporate snacks if it means that my meals are going to have to be smaller, then don't have snacks. Have fewer meals a day and just make them bigger. Again, so long as you're in a deficit. So overall, looking at these studies, looking at different numbers of meal frequency a day, we see that increasing meal frequency does not improve your metabolism. It does not affect your total daily energy expenditure. And it also does not increase fat loss or improve body composition. If anything, decreasing it seems to enhance fat loss based on that study that compared 3 meals versus 1. With the huge caveat that on average, the 1 meal condition did consume less calories compared to the 3 meal condition, which is a huge caveat when you're talking about the fact that the difference was in the amount of fat loss. Obviously, we know caloric intake is the number one determinant of weight loss and of fat loss. So if the 1 meal condition was eating less calories, that's most likely the reason why they lost more fat. But that's still the data that they presented. That's the data that I have to present, and it's kind of up to us to like interpret it. So do I think that 1 meal a day is more beneficial? Inherently, no. Do I think that 1 meal a day could potentially help you adhere to your deficit more by restricting your feeding window to 4 hours? Potentially, but that's an argument for time restricted feeding, not so much for meal frequency. And I want to talk about specifically meal frequency. So when we're talking about specifically meal frequency, I think a lot of times the narrative is like, eat 5 to 6 meals a day so that your metabolism can always be burning, or like more meals is better. Like bodybuilders have to eat super fucking frequently. Again, we're not talking about protein partitioning. We're not talking about protein frequency. We're talking about just meal frequency. The data does not suggest that more meals is better, which I think is largely the narrative being communicated. So these are the studies looking, like I said, at meal frequency. The last thing that I want to talk about, which to me is more interesting because it's what I practice and it's what I recommend to my clients, it's not so much how many times are you eating a day. Is it 3? Is it 6? Is it 14? That's not my primary concern. My primary concern is, what is your feeding pattern? Do you have a regular feeding pattern, or do you have an irregular feeding pattern? And so the next and last study that we're going to look at is called The Impact of Isoenergetic Intake of Irregular Meal Patterns on Thermogenesis, Glucose Metabolism, and Appetite by Al Hussein et al., published in 2022, so much more recent study. And this is looking at, you're consuming the same number of calories, but you're either consuming them in a regular, predictable fashion, or you're consuming them sporadically. So this study does not consider macronutrient breakdown. It's just looking at the regularity of meal timing. So again, it's not so much what's the macro breakdown and what's the meal frequency. It's within the way that you're eating. What is the impact of eating in a predictable fashion versus an irregular fashion? So this study had 9 18 to 45-year-old overweight or obese females that had no disease history except for insulin resistance. They had been weight stable for 3 months, and that was a requirement. And this was, again, a crossover design. So all 9 women that participated in the study did both the regular feeding pattern condition and the irregular feeding pattern condition. They had 2 weeks on each condition, with 2 weeks in between. So a 2-week washout period between conditions. The regular feeding pattern condition had them eating 6 meals per day. They were the same every single day. The irregular feeding pattern condition had 3 to 9 meals a day, and it ended up averaging 6 meals per day. But some days they might have had 3 meals, some days they might have had 5, some days they might have had 9. So it was giving them meals in a way that was unpredictable. and irregular, but also in a way that still averaged 6 meals a day. And again, the regular condition was just 6 meals a day at the same time every day. There was no exercise component to this, by the way. And so the food that they were provided was identical, and the study was not designed to lose weight or gain weight. The macros of their overall daily intakes were the same: 50% carb, 15% protein, and 35% fat. And they were all eating between 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. The only exception was that on the 3 meal per day days, the last meal was at 6 p.m. And they tested the thermic effect of food on the day after the 14-day intervention. So let me explain this further. All meals were the same. They were 50% carb, 15% protein, 35% fat. Their overall caloric value differed based on how many meals they were consuming a day, but it all totaled the same total daily caloric intake for both the regular condition and the irregular condition. So if the 6 meal a day regular group was consuming 1,500 calories, which I don't know exactly what their total daily intake was, but I just know that it was maintenance. If they were eating 1,500 calories, then when they came back 2 weeks later and they did the irregular condition, if they had a day where they were eating 3 meals a day, they were still eating 1,500 calories a day. And those 3 meals still had the same 50% carb, 15% protein, 35% fat distribution. It's just the size differed based on the number of meals they got in that day in order to total the same amount of total daily caloric intake, regardless of the condition, regardless of the amount of meals they were eating that day. And again, they were either doing 2 weeks of regular meal timing or 2 weeks of irregular meal timing. And they did one condition, left for 2 weeks, and then came back and did the other. So when they finished their 2 weeks on either the regular or the irregular meal timing condition, they then came back on day 14. They drank a standardized test drink that, again, 50% carb, 15% protein, and 35% fat. And after consuming that standardized test drink, their thermic effect of food was measured. And in order to standardize this test drink condition, regardless of whether you were doing the regular meal timing or the irregular meal timing, all subjects on day 14 consumed 6 meals per day on the day before testing. So if you remember, the irregular meal timing group was consuming 3 to 9 meals a day, but they all averaged 6 meals per day. So again, some days they might have gotten 3 meals, some days 5, some days 6, some days 9, some days 7. But on the last day, everyone ate 6 meals in order to standardize the testing condition that was going to happen the next day. So what did they find between regular feeding pattern, between regular meal timing and irregular, unpredictable feeding behavior? They found that the regular feeding pattern group had a statistically significantly higher thermic effect of food. So this was statistically significant. It was on average 23 calories higher versus 18 calories for the irregular group. And this is on average a 28% increase in the thermic effect of food. They did not measure body composition in the study, but they did look at hunger. And they found that hunger was significantly decreased in the regular meal group. Additionally, blood glucose responses were statistically significantly lower in the regular meal timing group, meaning they had greater insulin sensitivity. And if you remember, a lot of these subjects have insulin resistance. So insulin sensitivity is actually a huge benefit to them. So what are we saying here? We're saying that you're eating the same number of calories a day, but if you standardize, if you regulate your meal timing and your feeding patterns and your feeding behavior, and you make it predictable, you increase the thermic effect of food. So you increase the amount of calories that your body burns to digest that food. So it's a component of your metabolism, and you increase that. You decrease your hunger and you decrease your blood glucose response, meaning you have greater insulin sensitivity. All of this comes from consuming food and from eating in a regular, predictable way. And the reason why I think this is so much more important than meal frequency is because personally, I'm the kind of gal that eats the same, I think I eat 5 meals right now: breakfast, pre, post, penultimate, last. 5 meals a day. And I've been eating the same 5 goddamn meals for literally, I think 6, 7, 8, 9 months. I don't even know. I'm a creature of habit, and I know that not everyone can do that. I know it's not like psychologically sustainable for everyone. A lot of people get burnout from like eating the same things. But for me, even if I'm not eating the exact same thing, I'm eating around similar times. So I try to train at the same time every single day because I know that I have my breakfast, I have my pre-workout meal. Even on rest days, I will have my pre-workout meal around the same time, even if I'm not going to go train, which is my TRBS, but it's actually EWRBS right now, which is egg whites, rice, banana, salt, tiny bit almond butter, fire. Anyways, I find as a fellow like IBS girly, I have PTSD from anything like digestional, gut irregularity related. Like I used to go days constantly. I mean, you guys know the Peter days. I used to go days without going to the bathroom, and I would wake up literally traumatized. Like, am I going to go number 2 today? Like it was just a thing. My digestion was horrible. And as somebody who has that PTSD and has IBS and has been able to like genuinely stave off the symptoms for, I think over a year and a half now, crazy. I will die on the hill of regular meal timing and regular feeding behavior and regular feeding patterns. I think the predictability is so advantageous, especially digestionally. I mean, we see here that it's advantageous from a hunger, blood glucose, and metabolism standpoint. But anecdotally for me, I mean, our bodies are smart, okay? I mean, think literally back to the most simple psychological experiment. Think back to Pavlov's dogs. If you feed them at a certain time every single day, they start to actually anticipate the food they're about to get, and they start pre-producing saliva. I think that's what the test was. I might have butchered that, but that's the main idea of it, if I'm pretty sure. So if you can get your body to anticipate something by giving it that stimulus frequently and on a predictable schedule and at a predictable time and in a predictable way, your body starts to anticipate receiving that stimulus, and it can actually prepare and start physiologically secreting, creating, doing whatever it needs to do to prepare for that stimulus. So I don't think that it is an absurd concept to think that if I'm eating the same meals around the same time every single day, that the fact that it's about to be 12:15 and I normally eat my pre-workout meal between 12 and 1, I don't think it's crazy to think that my body is probably starting to prepare for the fact that I'm about to eat. My hunger has been pretty low, but I have a feeling that I'm about to get hungry because it's about to be my meal timing. I have a feeling that my body's probably starting to secrete some kind of digestive enzymes, some pancreatic lipases, some other digestive hormones, whatever it needs to secrete in order to adequately respond to the intake that it's probably anticipating it's going to receive. I mean, our bodies are smart machines. If you can get it to do these things on autopilot, the way your body's going to effectively and efficaciously digest through that meal, I think is going to be better than if you almost like catch it off guard. Now, don't be scared to like eat outside of regular meal timing because our bodies are smart. It can digest anything that you put into it, most things that you put into it. But if you want to optimize digestion, if you want to optimize your body's response to a meal, I do think that getting it to anticipate that meal has a benefit. And this study is pointing in that direction. I do think that there's a huge benefit digestionally and metabolically and psychologically, honestly, to regulating your meal timing, to consuming meals in a regular, predictable fashion. So similar meals at similar times every single day. And that might sound miserable for some people, but for me, the benefits, how much better I feel, how much I feel like satiated after a meal, because my body just also like knows when the meal's done almost. I just find everything is so much more predictable and regular and seamless, and there's so much more thought taken out of it. I genuinely think the benefits outweigh any negatives that I can personally see from consuming the same meals every single day. But again, I am a creature of habit, so it's probably easier for me than for people who need a lot of variety in their day. But I also get like decision paralysis. Like if I have to stop and figure out what do I want to eat, I will not be able to make a decision. So for me, eating the same meals, like just knowing the fact that it's about to be like my next meal time and I just know exactly what I'm going to have. Like I just put it together and have it. That to me also has like benefits outside of metabolism, hunger, blood glucose regulation, digestion. It has benefits outside of all those things. But anyways, to recap everything, increasing your meal frequency does not seem to have an effect on metabolism or on body composition. There is a study that suggests that decreasing your meal frequency to one meal might decrease your fat mass. But again, that's with the huge caveat that the group that consumed only one meal also consumed less calories total. So it might not be inherently that one meal is better. It might just be that having to consume all your calories in one meal is more conducive towards you adhering to a deficit. But it's probably the deficit that's contributing and responsible for the decrease in fat mass. But you do with that what you will. That's my hot take. We do see that having regular feeding patterns and regular meal timing is beneficial to your metabolism, to your hunger, and to your blood glucose response compared to irregular feeding behavior and irregular feeding patterns. So with that, it does not matter if you prefer 3 meals a day, if you prefer 5 meals a day. Whatever you prefer, choose that, stick with it at similar times every single day. Even if your meal is not the exact same, try to make it similar. So if you're having a meal one day that's like chicken and rice, and the next day you really want like sweet potatoes and beef, if you make them similar in macronutrient composition, I think that's still fine as long as you're eating them similar macro composition at a similar time every single day. So takeaway is, doesn't matter how many meals you consume. It doesn't matter if you prefer 3 meals or 3 meals and 3 snacks. Pick the number of meals that best helps you adhere to your current caloric goal based on whether you want to be in a deficit, in a surplus, at maintenance. Whatever meal distribution is going to allow you to adhere to your caloric daily goal best, that's what you should pick. Once you pick that, stick with it. Try to find similar meals at similar times every single day. And I think that it will optimize your digestion. It will optimize your thermic effect of food and contribute to your metabolism. It will decrease your hunger, and it will increase your blood glucose response, making you more insulin sensitive, which is a good thing when it comes to responding adequately to the meals that you've consumed. So that is what I got for you today. Hopefully this helps, because I do think that there's like a lot of people saying different things when it comes to meal timing and macronutrient distribution and nutrient partitioning. And the biggest thing is, at least when it comes to number of meals a day and regularity of your feeding behavior, doesn't matter how many meals you eat, as long as you keep it regular, day to day, you keep it predictable, and you turn your body into a motherfucking machine. So I think that's all I got. Friendly reminders, if you have any questions, you want to contradict me, you want me to cover something specific, email me at thevaliditypodcast@gmail.com. You can also DM me at VallFitt or at thevaliditypodcast. And if you are interested in participating in the world's first reverse diet intervention study, then please email reversedietstudy@gmail.com, and we'll get back to you with whatever information we need to hopefully have you participate in the study. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next episode.